Boom, 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 boom. Hello and welcome to part 10 of 14, Caernarfon Castle. Now, if I do that, that's probably better. Caernarfon Castle. You see, there is part of me which loves it. It really is. It's a big feature in Edward I and Wales, in castles. And in more recent castles. This is Mark Morris's book. In all three, Caernarfon is a big feature. And that meant that really, when I went to Caernarfon, I was really looking forward to it. I was thinking, this is a great castle. It's going to be something beautiful. But it had a few things going on which really sort of annoy me. One, they're putting in a cafe on top of the keep, on top of the gatehouse. And okay, yes, it's going to bring in more money. And yes, it's going to create an amazing space to look over Caernarfon and the castle. And yes, that's probably going to enrich the history and bring more people into it. And I'm all for bringing more people into history. But the amount of building work, the amount of stuff having to be done to the castle, the amount of money having to be spent, I'd prefer it to be spent on the other stuff in the castle. Cadwa is supported by the government. There is a certain point at which their purpose is to preserve and maintain their castles, and I've been around a few of their castles and they are leaking and they need more very expensive work. A lot of very expensive work needs to be done on them. Even in Caernarfon there were spots where frankly someone needed to go and put some more lime mortar down, and yet they have the money for that. And that's before we get on to some of the interactive displays. There was one which I think was more like a creation myth than history. It was talking about a Roman emperor and a beautiful princess being born in the castle. I'm sort of going, A, the Roman fort is up the hill, so it wouldn't be this castle, and B, as much as I love the idea of a Roman emperor visiting Caernarfon, I doubt it. I doubt it strongly. So, that meant, as much as I was hoping when I visited Caernarfon to love it, and there were parts in it which, frankly, I was impressed by. I was impressed by them. And there were parts of the castle which I really did love. There were also parts of the castle, and I have to admit some of the staff, who I was less impressed by. So, my usual advice now when it comes to Caernarfon is, how do I put this? Caernarfon Castle is kind of like a garden centre instead of a nursery, a gardening nursery, so kids nursery. If you go to a place which is called a nursery for plants, it's all about the plants. If you go to a garden centre, and this might not be the case in every country, but if you do in Britain, it's got the plant section, but also the fish section, a book section, a knick-knack section, a cafe, sometimes more than one cafe, a whole ream of pots, outdoor furniture, sheds, and all sorts of things. Basically, a nursery is for those people who are looking just for plants, and sometimes it's just a specific type of plants because they specialise. A garden centre is for those people who are looking to while away a few hours looking for not much in particular to fill their garden with. Castles you go to. So, my point is, if you're trying to entertain people who are looking for something to do but are not particularly interested in castles as a special thing themselves, but will enjoy the experience, Caernarfon's a good place to go. If you're entertaining people who are very, very keen on their castles, i.e. if I was taking Drac to a castle in Wales, I wouldn't take him to Caernarfon. I wouldn't. He loves his history, he loves his castles, he's very interested in medieval history. It would disappoint him. I would take him to Pembroke, I would take him to Harlech, I would take him to Beaumaris, I would take him to Rufflin. Flint, quite possibly. All these ones without hesitation. Caernarfon I wouldn't. Conversely, if I was taking my lovely aunt and uncle, who I love very much, but who are not as fascinated by castles as me and Drac are, and who probably would like the idea of a disabled access space that can get them right up to the top so they can have a look around while having a nice cup of tea, and rather than thinking this is built on top of the castle, what damage has been done to put this up there. Yes, I approve of the access. If they had just been putting in the access system and maybe a ramping round the roof for the people to get up there, that would be something I could have got behind completely. It's the whole entertaining space I just find a bit. And I do understand that is my personal view and it's complicated. But if I was taking my aunt and uncle, I take them to Caernarfon. They probably go round it in about an hour, 90 minutes, and then they do some shopping, and then they'd wander down to the seaside and get some fish and chips and be very, very happy. So, that's where some of the sarcasm you are probably going to hear in my discussion of Caernarfon comes from. And if you haven't guessed it, these are the 3 books which are forming a lot of the stuff this is, but the stuff this is based off. Because they're good books. Alright, so let's get into the proper history now. We've discussed Caernarfon as a tourist destination and somewhere to visit. It's a beautiful looking castle. It is certainly an individual castle with those particular shaped towers. There isn't going to be anything else like it that you're going to see anywhere. And It is definitely seaside. It is most definitely seaside. Now, prior to this castle, as I already mentioned, there was a Roman fort, Segotium, which is built on the hill up above. And here is the thing: Caernarfon actually derives its name from the Roman fortifications. In Welsh, the place is called Ygea, Caernarfon, Caernarfon, the stronghold in the land over against Mon. Mon being the Welsh name for Anglesey. We don't really know what happened to Saguntium and its civilian settlement after Romans departed from Britain. The odds are the fort was abandoned and its materials robbed for local properties, or possibly the settlement moved into the town moved into the fort as a way to protect itself, and from there we have the growth of the model settlement. We do know there was a settlement on there before Edward I turns up to build Caernarfon Castle. In fact, we know that the Norman conquest of England, William the Conqueror, when he turned his attention to Wales, one of the places he was aiming for was Caernarfon area. Now, originally, he puts various people in charge, and Robert of Ruthven, who was supposedly in command of the whole northern Wales, was killed by the Welsh in 1088. So his cousin, Hugh de Oashes, Earl of Chester, is sent to reassert Norman control of North Wales by building 3 castles. They are located at Minered, somewhere, Aberylg in Anglesey, and finally Caernarfon. Caernarfon is a known place. It's a good place to build a castle because it's somewhere you can secure quite easily. It's a peninsula, and there is the River Senon on one side, there's the Menai Strait on the other. Anyway, this castle is captured by Gwynedd in 1115, and part of the Welsh kingdom of Gwynedd, and it's known that Llewellyn the Great and later Llewellyn ap Gruffydd stayed at Caernarfon in their time. It is a castle which is traditionally associated with the Prince of Wales, the Principality of Wales, especially after the Normans had built it. But of course the original Norman castle was a Motte and Bailey affair, just like the Roman fort was a nice square affair. And this looks like the walls of Byzantium. Some castles, as we talked about before, are more fortress than palace. Some are more palace than fortress. Caernarfon is definitely a statement. In whatever language you think it's talking, it is a statement. You see it and you go, wow. It's got a huge number of arrow slits. It's got all these lovely high towers with these little towerlets on top of them. Really high. Has a commanding view over a flattish immediate area. but also it can see up into the hills around it. And as you can see, it's got the water on two sides of it. It's not an easy thing to get across. And yes, that is a giant car park now, but it wasn't always a giant car park. That's mostly been built up later. Believe it or not, the car park didn't precede Edward I's castle, which possibly shocked a tourist when I was talking about it, because they said, "Isn't this good? They built the castle next to the car park." I wasn't quite sure if they were being sarcastic or not. Unfortunately, their accent suggested they were really not. Anyway, so here is an early plan of Caernarfon. You can see the castle down here, and you can see the tower walls. You can also see that there is a sort of curtain wall on the coast, and there is a sort of dry moat between that wall and the inner wall. It goes quite far around it, and it requires a bridge over it to get over it at one point. There are marshes, there are all sorts of different patches of water. This is not a place you want to try and lay siege to. They are probably going to be able to resupply quite easily. That's the whole point of Caernarfon. You can resupply it quite easily. And here is why. So, A is the site of the Watergate. B, Eagle Tower. C, Queen's Tower. D, the Well Tower, which, believe it or not, has a well in it. E, the Lower Ward. And that also has the Great Hall in it, and the kitchen, and theoretically could have been built to be walled off from the Upper Ward if they put in the inner wall, but they hadn't. H, the Chamberlain Tower. Always good to have the Chamberlain sitting opposite the entrance. Means he's going to keep a good eye on the guards, because let's be honest, there's a very short run in a straight line for anyone who gets through the main gate to get to his home. I, the King's Gate. J, the Upper Ward. K, the Black Tower. A very scary place to be. L, the Granary Tower. Wonder what that contains. M, the Northeast Tower. N, the Cistern Tower. And O, the Queen's Gate. Blue areas are those built between 1283 to 92. And red is that completed between 1295 and 1323. Because they completed the blue stuff first, because that connected in with the wall around Caernarfon. And then they built the inner castle, because it was more important to build the wall around Caernarfon, the town. Because the castles are a method of protecting the town, and of being maritime supply posts and bringing in supplies from the sea and having a secure post. But the towns are the mechanisms of peaceful changing, of completing what was done in southern Wales, of intermarrying with the local population, of economically intertwining them with the rest of the Edward's kingdom. That's the thing the towns are for. But the towns can't do any of that if they can be destroyed at the whim of the local Welsh population, the local Welsh lords, to get pissed off. So that is why you have walls, and that is why you have a castle. Because I can't take the town if I can't take the castle. I can't take the castle if I can't stop it having food supplies and other supplies brought in. What's even worse is, if I don't manage to quickly take the town, I can't quickly break my way through the walls, that can also be resupplied. So I have to take the town to take the castle. I have to take the castle to take the town. If I fail to take either one of those, and the odds are if I'm going to fail to take one, it's going to be the castle, then I'm in trouble. I need to take both to be able to control it. It's the Terrence. It's that thing which maritime power is so often used for. You raise stakes. Not in an aggressive manner, but in a way which raises the cost of carrying out an offensive action. So now, if I'm a local prince of Wales or a local lord, my choices are do it the way which endears me to my English king now, or if not, then I'm going to need to deal with that local population. In which case, do I have enough troops and enough information to be able to take both the town and the castle quickly? Because if I can't take them quickly, they can get reinforced. If they get reinforced, I might not be able to take them at all. It's just annoying. It really is. Here is the geography. Of Caernarfon. Now you will notice that I have a fair number of castles picked out on there. Beaumaris, Anglesey, Harlech, all picked out. But Caernarfon is pretty visible, and you can see the fact that Caernarfon is in a flat area. Again, it is a key access point into Snowdonia, into Gwynedd. It controls one end of the Menai Straits, and it is very easy to resupply from the sea. So, what is the history of this place? Well, when the war began in 1282, it was because Dafydd ap Gruffudd had decided to attack the English. In 1283, though, well, by 1283, Dafydd and Llewellyn are no more problems. Llewellyn has died and his brother doesn't have long to live. Edward had managed to march through northern Wales very efficiently. Now, here is where various interesting stories start into the circuit. You have James St. George is involved of construction of the castle, of course. But according to the Flores Historium, which is a Latin chronicle, associated of medieval English historians, sort of associated originally with the area of St Stephen's, and basically it's monks' chronicles. It's during the construction of the castle and planned town that the body of a Roman emperor, Magnus Maximus, was discovered. Now, interesting enough, what we know about Magnus Maximus, he was made emperor in Britain. And he was there, but he, invades Italy and is defeated by Theodosius at the Battle of Porvidvedo in 388. Now, in the nicest way, if he dies in 388, age 53, in Italy, the odds of his body showing up in Wales is incredibly unlikely. Okay? I don't want to be rude to any Welsh listeners who are believing of this story. It's a rather interesting thing because, yes, there are a lot of Roman historians around this point. Roman history is not as far away from this period as you would possibly think because of the way the Catholic Church has worked and the way that institutional memory has been remembered. And claiming links to Roman emperors is a very good thing for kings to do to suggest they have more power. So Edward I is not an unblemished record in this thing. And I have no doubt they could have discovered the burial of a highborn Roman. Yes, we might go that Romans sometimes have proclivities towards cremation, but they do burial as well. Highborn Roman might well have been found. It is unlikely it was an emperor. Very, very unlikely. As said, he dies in Italy. I don't think his body was brought all the way back to Britain to be buried. To be honest, he dies at the Battle of Porvidvedo, where let's see. He's routed. His army's routed. He flees to Aquila, and he's besieged there. He's delivered in chains to Theodosius, and is executed on the 28th of July by modern calendar time. There. I am sorry if this is upsetting anyone, it's not my intention, but that myth and the very large amount of time to spend on it in the castle, various interactive systems, is interesting. Okay, so let's get on with the proper history. The construction of the new stone castle was basically part of a wholesale transformation of Caernarfon. Imagine London pre and post the Great Fire. Town walls are added, connected to the castle, a new quay is built, and you know, there is even a Bratagium type of stockade built to protect the site quickly while permanent defences are under construction. Timber being shipped from Liverpool. Stone mainly comes from nearby places, including Anglesey and around the town, and it's a force of hundreds which are building the castle, building the walls, digging in, making it. And Edward I and Eleanor Castile, his first wife and queen, arrives roughly in July 1283 and stays for over a month to monitor the progress of the castle as it's beginning. In fact, they come back several times, and Edward II was born at Caernarfon, apparently according to tradition, in April 1284, and is made Prince of Wales, of course, in 1301, with control over Wales and its incomes. Basically, an attempt by Edward I to give Edward, his 17-year-old son, some experience in terms of running a country. Doesn't necessarily do that well, but hey ho. And that's which has sent the traditional practice of the heir to the throne being the Prince of Wales. By 1285, Caernarfon's town walls are mostly complete. However, between 1289 and 1292, spending construction becomes negligible and accounts end in 1292, so presume whatever construction is going to be done has been completed by 1292. By 1292, in fact, £12,000 can be spent on the construction of Caernarfon's castle, but it wasn't really complete. And in 1294, Madoc ap Llewellyn, who calls himself the Prince of Wales at this point. Remember, Edward II hasn't been crowned Prince of Wales yet, another 7 years away. He's only 10 years old at this point. Now, he focuses heavily on Caernarfon because it's a critical place. It's critical spiritually, it's critical economically. And Madog's forces captured a town in September, heavily damaging the town walls of 1294. The castle, between the town and the castle, there is just a ditch and a temporary barricade. This means, of course, it's a big problem because that means the castle is quickly taken. The whole idea was that the castle and the town would make each other completely defensible, but actually by not having the separation between the castle and the town, you suddenly have no defences for the castle or the town. And it's quickly burnt. So, fun times. 1295, the English retake Caernarfon and refortify the town and spend about another £1,000 completing the repairs on the wall of the town, and then shift to finishing off the castle. And that is done as quickly as possible. Now at this point, Beaumaris Castle is put under construction because that's now considered critical, and so James St George hands off to Walter of Hereford. Now, Walter of Hereford is a very interesting character in his own right. He is a son of the first Earl of Hereford, Miles of Gloucester, brother of the second Earl of Hereford, and all sorts of things. He's serves as the king's constable. He's a very experienced noble officer. But more importantly, he has apprenticed under James St. George. He has been working with him. And he can therefore, even despite being noble, he also can take over the role of Master Mason. And he does this. He's put in charge of spending £4,500 to finish off the northern wall and towers. When Walter dies in 1309, although he has spent in that period about another 4 years in Scotland helping out there, his immediate subordinate, Henry Elton, takes over the position of Master Mason. Again, someone who's been trained up. And construction continued at a steady rate until about 1330. From 1284 to 1330, when accounts finally end, we're looking at roughly £26,000 has been spent on Caernarfon's castle and town walls. Sums which dwarf the spending on Dover, and this was something which was interesting for me because it was first spotted out in Wikipedia, and I looked it up for comparison because I thought, why are they bringing up this castle? Chateau Galliard in France, which is a lovely looking castle. Again, next to water for ease of resupply, and a very, very cool position. And something which I might do a bit of a talk about at some point because it has some interesting histories. And therefore it could be beautiful. But we'll leave that to one side. However, even with all this work, there are still additions to be done to the castle, and the rears of the King's Gate, the entrance from the town, and the Queen's Gate, the entrance to the southeast, are left unfinished, and the foundations for the castle's interior mark, where buildings were stood, was stopped. Caernarfon has proved critical ever since. It really has. It's been a castle with a history. Every single time there's a war, every time there's something going on, it's impacted. It's a beautiful castle. And as you can see, it gets into the culture. There's a Turner painting, there's a Farragon painting, and they show very interesting takes on the castle, especially if we compare them to the modern picture, which shows the level of work that has been taken out by various points since Ministry of Works and various other things have got involved to restore the castle. Because there is a big difference between those pictures painted in the 1700s and the 19th century and this and these. It's a very big difference, but you can still see the impressiveness of the castle. You can see the quality of its design. You can see how colossal it is. How its layers of galleries, how it's designed to work for the defenders. Because here is the problem. Let's say I want to do counter battery fire. First thing I need to know is where I'm being fired at from. And okay, arrows are coming from that direction. Well, there's about a dozen different slits that could be firing at me. And you walk around this castle, and I mean there are slits everywhere. There are slits everywhere. You will, to attack any part of this castle, you'll be having to turn your back on arrow slits. And the thing is, the castle's designed so that people can move rapidly between various spots. So you could be attacking a position and think, yes, I got here. And then the archers that were in that position, which were firing in front of you, will disappear, and you go, And they'll suddenly be behind you, firing from behind you. And there'll be people with swords and other, probably pole arms, waiting at various points to go, hello, you've come to say hi? Very tight confined space? Or alternatively, ooh, nice ladder, let me push. There are lots of options. Caernarfon has them all. And it's unsurprising the way it's then involved. Now, we've talked about other castles being the seat of power in their local area. Caernarfon is, in many ways, supposed to be the seat of English government in the north. So those other castles basically are the rulers of large areas, but Caernarfon is supposed to be the ruler of its own large area as well as the one all the other castles look to. Hence, it's supposed to have a large chunk of royal accommodation, although that's never completed. And the fortified buildings between the lower and the upper ward, also never built. It's just a massive, massive thing. If the King's Gate had been completed, a visitor would have crossed 2 drawbridges, passed through 5 doors under 6 portcullises, and negotiated a right-angle turn before emerging into the lower closure. All the way overlooked by arrow loops, murder holes, and matriculations. It's over the top, excessive. And the thing is, that wouldn't have been the end, because as we've been over, and as you can sort of see when you look at this picture especially, you can see where another line of fortification was supposed to go. So there should have been even more. You can also see quite clearly the layers of galleries they have. That's the firing positions. And it's also shown when we look at it from the outside, because you can see the height of the slits. It's colossal. It is really a very, very powerful and very potent place. And it's rather beautiful as well. But as said at the very beginning, if you are interested in a castle, there are better castles to go to from terms of experience of looking at a castle. If you're looking for a castle-themed day out, then Caernarfon's good. And in many ways, it's not surprising, because it is still very much a symbol of Welsh national pride, and it's got their foundation myth in it. There is nothing wrong with having your foundation myth on strong display. Although, honestly, and this is probably going to get me even more harassment, or rather upset, but I'd expected more dragons involved in it, less Romans. It's Welsh. And this is coming from someone who's got family surnames in my heritage things like Browning, Newcomb, Gosling, Jacobs, all sorts of names going around there. So anyway, what have we got coming up? Well, we've still got, after this one, another 4 of these to go, of which most are recorded when I'm recording this video. There is the summary one left to record, and I'm probably going to add some question and answers into that one. And what have we got coming up? Robert Calder, the Battle of Lisa. Possibly going to flick around some of the stuff in August. And the original cruisers, Royal Navy frigates in the Age of Sail, coastal defence ships, theory, design and operational differences between navies. All cool stuff. All very cool stuff. Right. I hope you've enjoyed. I hope you found it worthwhile. And before I finish, I will add a little bit more about Caernarfon. Just a little bit more history. The castle actually is important enough that despite being besieged 3 times during the Civil War, that's what I would tend to call the War of the Three Kingdoms, and what other people tend to sometimes call the War of the English Civil War, as if the Welsh, the Scottish, the Irish do not all get thoroughly involved. And although it was ordered in 1660 that the castle and town walls should be dismantled, the work was aborted and never started. In other words, the castle wasn't slighted. This was because it was considered such an important post for Wales. It was considered that slighting it could well undermine government authority in Wales, but also severely hamper Welsh pride. This meant that from the 1870s onwards, when government starts to fund repairs to Caernarfon Castle because of Welsh pride, because it's important, and the Deputy Constable Llewellyn Turner is put in charge of the works, there is a lot there for him to work with. So despite his work being very controversial, because he's restoring and rebuilding the castle and occasionally getting rid of various buildings which get in his way when he's doing it, he has a lot more to work with than he might have in other castles. Eventually this passes on to the officers of works and its successors, the Ministry of Works and all sorts of things. Eventually it gets to Cadwa, who look after it. And it is now, as of 1986, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. There are other castles. But, interesting enough, they are listed as the castles and town walls of King Edward in Gwynedd. And they are Caernarfon, Harlech, Conwy, Beaumaris, and their associated town walls. Not Wales, not even North Wales, Gwynedd. And this is the point I'm trying to make. Caernarfon is not about Wales, it's about North Wales, and specifically about the Principality and the status of Gwynedd. When we start talking about things as being an invasion and subjugation of Wales, we're missing out on some of the rich tapestry of the history because we are steamrolling over facts, but we are also, and far more important, actually missing out on the value of Gwynedd on this part. Because here is the thing. Wales as a whole trying to resist King Edward I. That's an interesting story, but it's not quite 20 times the size, a 20-to-1 ratio, as some commenters have put on the videos. It's not, because again, the English population is nowhere near the same disparate ratio as it is today to Wales or Scotland then, because the populations hadn't grown up as much. Still pretty fairly large, it's disparate. But actually, when you consider it's to Gwynedd, and it's a large chunk of Wales is on the side of the English, and other factors, I mean, just said, food from Ireland, etc., and occasionally some Scottish knights, all these things, that is possibly a 20-to-1 population relatively to Gwynedd. And the fact that Gwynedd manages to fight as long as it does, and put up the level of fight it does, is incredibly impressive. It gets undermined when you try and say Wales rather than Gwynedd, because we're talking about a specific area in northern Wales and Anglesey. We're talking about Snowdonia. So that's the thing. That's the critical area. And that is a beautiful area to visit. I mean, I'm not really keen on the idea of a walking holiday. I do enough walking and other things. But driving around that area, doing this research and doing other things up in Wales, there are many times, if I'm on roads, I have pulled into parking spots, got out and started taking photos. It's an absolutely fantastic area. The people are lovely and friendly, and it is well worth a visit. But they're also, I would say, fairly hardy, even to this day in that area. They are a centered people. And I can see how that patch of the world managed to put up the level of resistance it did to what was one of the finest and most well-honed fighting machines in all of Europe at that time. And admittedly, most of that force had been honed fighting Edward's father, Henry III's, various baronial enemies. But it had been honed. Or fighting for them. Edward didn't mind. As long as they fought for him, he didn't really mind as much. He didn't want the leaders. He got rid of them. But the troops below them, he was quite happy to have them. Pragmatic man is Housewood. Right. Thank you very much, everyone. Hope you enjoyed. And please do remember, thank you to all my patrons and everyone who's joined the channel. You're making everything a lot easier in terms of me keeping the keeping my research up and doing all the work I'm supposed to be doing. Thank you.